Hey guys, welcome to another video on this beautiful day. I want to tell you about a book that I have been reading that is blowing my mind, and I really hope I can break this down and the things I'm learning from this in a way that's coherent. I'll do my best. There's just so much in this. The book is called Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zeland. I don't have a copy of it. I have it on my Kindle, but I'll pop up a cover here. This book is a guidebook, a very, very dense and thick guidebook on advanced energy dynamics, on how to navigate oneself into alternative timelines. It blows anything I've ever learned about reality navigation or manifestation completely out of the water. This is about advanced reality navigation, and it is not what you think. Originally, this book was written in Russian, in Russia. Duh. Thanks, Casper, for the clarity. And it's been translated now into many different languages, and it's sold over 1 million copies because Vadim goes into some pretty wild things that I've never personally looked at from his perspective. I think this book is extremely important, especially if you want to understand what is happening to you right now, to your reality. And let's face it, our reality is being messed with on a deep, deep level. If you want to understand what's happening in the world, and personally, I believe if you want to believe to understand how to get ourselves out of this mess and navigate into the ultimate timeline, this is the book to read, and these are the concepts to understand, I believe. Okay, so where to begin? So ultimately, or principally, if you're going down the spiritual route and you've done your research and your inner searching and you've had your own adventures and awakenings, you've probably come across the concept that there's an infinite amount of realities available for us, right? And you could potentially choose this one or that one. But what is it that actually decides? What's the deciding factor of which timeline you actually pop into? Well, most people will say, oh, it's just positive thinking or visualization, and taking the right actions. And that could be one aspect of it, but what he talks about in his book completely blows that out of the water in certain aspects, because he talks about advanced energy dynamics that, at least for the most part, in my own life, I had no clue that I was even willingly participating in. And it's that those dynamics interplaying with the connection in your heart and your mind actually decide which timeline you pop into. And if you are unaware of these dynamics, you can be messed with externally and actually just be thrown into a different timeline. And if you look around what's happening on planet Earth right now, it may kind of seem like that's what's happening, and because it is. So this book explains a lot of that. So he starts with that basic model of alternative timelines, and he's got a pretty interesting model. But then he just dives into something which I've never really fully contemplated and understood until now. And it's the fact that you, as a creative being, whenever you put your energy into creating anything, consciously or unconsciously, whether you're creating a business or a video or a relationship or a conversation, or whether you participate in a political party or a movement, or you become a fan of something, or start to really delve into a topic, whatever you put your creative energy or you even just your attention on, in the most basic way, you are creating a reality vortex. You are participating in what he calls a pendulum. I'll call it a vortex for simplicity in this video. In a vortex, you are creating an energy being, a type of life form, And this life form has an agenda of its own. And this life form, actually, if you continue to participate in it, will think its thoughts through you. This life form will have its own agenda and it will think its thoughts through you. And here's the kicker. You will think that they are your own thoughts and that it is your own agenda, but it is not. And the majority of humanity right now, most of our lives are actually spent in unconscious relationships with these vortexes, with these energy beings. And our relationship to them actually alters our frequencies and ultimately plays a massive factor in deciding which timeline you pop into or out of. This is mind-blowing stuff. I'm going to back up here a little bit and try to explain this for this to make sense, because this is like really mind-blowing stuff. So with the most basic example he gives is you've got a swing and maybe you've got a child on the swing, right? And you come up and you push the swing. This is the most basic type of pendulum, as he calls it, or energy vortex. Now, every single energy vortex that you participate in, whether it's a swing or a business or a relationship or building a house or whatever it is, there's a necessary influx of energy that you need to put in as an adherent to the vortex. Whether you're participating consciously or unconsciously, you've got to put your energy into the vortex. Otherwise the vortex will actually spit you out and say, okay, you're not participating in my agenda. I don't need you, so therefore you must go. And if you've ever had an experience in your life where you were a part of something and all of a sudden you were kicked out of it, it's because the vortex actually had no more use for you and it didn't want you in its game because you weren't playing along with its agenda. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, but I want to be part of this relationship or this thing and my identity's wrapped up in it. And blah, but sorry, you've got to go because you're not resonating with the vortex anymore. And so out you go and choose a different timeline that you're going to be popped into or, sucked into. So you've got to put your energy into a vortex and it gives you something out. So there's an influx of energy and an outflow of something else. And usually what the vortex provides for you is a type of experience, a type of environment, safety, security, or identity. Because vortexes will actually use, and this is where it just gets mind-blowing, and like it's kind of a huge awakening. They'll use, depending on what the vortex is and how advanced it is and what role it's trying to play in our reality, what kind of energies it's trying to suck on, it will actually use a whole template of human emotions that it's thinking through you based on the thoughts that it can hook into you on, to make you do its bidding. So it will play on a series of emotions, and it will give you that emotional feedback as well. So if you're participating in a political party, for example, that's a type of vortex, it will give you a sense of righteousness. It will give you a sense of identity. It will give you a sense of belonging. And this is true for many groups that you might participate in, which are also vortexes. Now, I'm not saying, don't participate in political parties or groups or fan groups. I'm just telling you there's a hidden energetic dynamic underneath of these things in creation that are really worth taking a look at, because based on where you are in your spiritual development and the types of traumas that you carry, the types of identity, pockets of your identity that you're working with, those are the type of energy vortexes, as he begins to explain in his book, that will hook into you and drag you into different timelines. And it's the process of really unhooking from these that is very, very crucial. Okay, I'm getting into a whole freaking tangent in here, but I'll just finish up this thought. Ultimately, what he says is that until you learn to become aware of, and this is just the first part of the book, these dynamics with energy vortexes, and begin to unhook your energy from them consciously, you're not free to choose which timeline you want to go into. You're just a puppet. You're being dragged around vortexes that are doing their own bidding, masking themselves as righteous things, as beautiful things, and really working through your own sense of identity construct to create their own reality and drag you into another timeline. And you have nothing to do with it. Because ultimately, these vortexes, as beautiful as it may feel to participate in them in a relationship or a political party or this movement or that movement or a business that you're creating, yeah, participate in it consciously. But you have to understand, ultimately, the vortex does not care about you and your well-being. It does not care. It does not give a damn. The main principle of the vortex, of these pendulums that he talks about, of these energy beings that we co-create through our creative energies, the main thing that they want is more adherence. So they want more energy inputs, which is why vortexes usually grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. That's all they ultimately care about. They care about energetic support. And if you at one point begin to remove your energetic support from a vortex, you'll actually see this, and I've experienced this in my own life. The vortex will, depending on its level of malevolency, if it's a malevolent vortex, and most vortexes are, the vortex will actually either spit you out or in some cases like kill you. Like, for example, gangs, that's a huge type of energetic being or construct, vortex. If you participate, if you put your energy into something, into that kind of vortex, well, you get rewarded, you get a better status, and you get security, and you're part of the gang, and you're part of that. But as soon as you try to remove yourself, from the mafia or whatever, what happens? Well, the vortex turns on you, because the vortex's primary instinctive need is to continually gather more energy, gather more adherence, more people to give it energy and feed it, and pull people from other vortexes that are competing with its own survival, so destroy other vortexes, and just maintain its own ecosystem. And if someone is not playing along or being out of resonance with the intention of the vortex, well, then the vortex will either spit that person out or, in extreme cases, actually kill them. And if you look at history through political movements, through wars, how empires have grown and fallen, you begin to see this vortex dynamics, and it's quite shocking. But most importantly, it's really important to actually see this in your own life and see where you're feeding certain reality vortexes and how it's playing out through your own life. So I hope that makes sense. Back to that swing example, I've kind of like covered this already, but you start to push a swing and the swing swings and you're creating an energy being. And what do you have to do? You have to constantly put your energy into it, right? For that swing to swing and for it to keep going. That's the most basic example of a vortex or a pendulum dynamic in life. Ultimately, if you look at that thing as a life form, what is it doing? It's pulling energy from you, right? And it's creating a situation, a beautiful situation. You're enjoying the connection with the child in the swing. You're enjoying that day. You're enjoying the whole thing. But you've got to continuously put your energy into it, right? As soon as you step away, what might happen? Well, this is the most basic example of a vortex, but maybe the child would get bored and walk away. But usually it's like, no, push me more, like I want more, right? Like the vortex just wants to keep going. It wants to keep spinning. The whole reality can keep going. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter who's pushing the swing as long as the thing just keeps going, right? That's the most basic example of a vortex. But this is what's at play on the foundational level of co-creative forces throughout the universe. And we have to understand that left to their own devices moving through us, most of the time, these forces are very unconscious and they have a life of their own. They have an agenda of their own. And if we're not actually aware of what's happening, they can completely take us for a ride and into alternative timelines. And he goes at length into explaining how this works. Now, please get the book if you find this interesting, because I'm probably missing so much here. He goes into so many details of how vortexes function. But the most important thing to understand is that they have a reality of their own. They just want to constantly feed on different energies, not really caring where they come from. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter whether it's positive energy or negative energy. The vortexes are feeding on both. And this is fascinating because he goes into explaining how, for example, like in a political party, which is also a vortex, let's take what's been happening, in the world lately and in the United States. You have somebody running for president or the incumbent, right? And there's a massive amount of positive energy in the vortex spinning that thing up, but there's also a massive amount of negative energy being projected on this person. So much negative energy that left to their own devices, this human being, without the support of the vortex, would actually probably die from all that massive influx of like negative psychic energy being projected on that person. But because they're part of a vortex of positive energy and negative energy, these things actually balance out and the vortex can support and keep running. Now, whether you want to be part of the vortex or not and actually participate in that whole thing is another thing altogether. And this is where really the deciding factor comes into play, of realizing like what the hell is actually going on here, and with my consciousness being sucked into this whole thing. And this is where I began to realize how so many parts of my own life were actually of my own consciousness was wrapped up in particular vortexes that were sucking my energy as I was supporting them positively or negatively. Like one example I'll give you, which is very personal to me, is the whole mask wearing thing, throughout 2020. Obviously, if you follow me, I don't wear masks and I have my own opinion about what's going on, which is a very strong opinion. But there was like a lot of negative push against that. Every time I'd be traveling and just seeing this whole thing happening and seeing people wearing masks, it'd be just like, like, take that stupid fucking thing off your face. What are you doing? Haven't you read the news, the real news, right? But I realized after reading this that I'm actually feeding the whole thing, because it's just the vortex. That's all it is. And it's hooking into my own personal ideologies and belief systems to get energy, get a rise out of me. And I'm feeding it. I'm feeding that global massive vortex with my negative energy of just like, resistance. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what I do, whether I hand out, I'm happy about it and hand out flyers and tell people what's really going on, or I'm like really negative about it. I'm feeding that vortex. And ultimately, what he talks about in his book, in the first part, is how to collapse an energy vortex. And I'm not going to spoil it here because I want you to go read the book and check it out, but it's freaking mind-blowing. And it has nothing to do with what most of humanity is doing right now. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about it, since it's important and you might not go out and read it. Well, the ultimate way to actually collapse an energy vortex is to, and this is fascinating, you have to actually acknowledge the fact that the vortex is a life form. And it has a right to exist. It's a life form, it's a type of life that you've created, unconsciously or consciously, on this planet. Whether it's a big vortex or a small thing, you've created it. So it has a right to exist, and it has a right to live. Interesting. And then you can either ignore it or do something really unexpected to collapse that vortex. And he goes into really in-depth examples of that and how that can move through different people's psyches and everything. And I highly recommend you go out and read it, because I don't want to go into those examples. But ultimately, acknowledging the vortex for what it is a type of life form. It has a right to exist. It has a right to live. And then ignoring it, just letting it be and not allowing it to touch you inside, or doing something really unexpected. And that third example I won't go into in depth here because it's another thing altogether. So that's Reality Transurfing, like the first few chapters, and it's freaking mind-blowing. There's so many different examples he goes into it in the book that I won't get into here because it will go beyond the scope of my knowledge and experience with this. I highly recommend the book if you want to understand what's happening right now in your own life and in the world on a much deeper level, and how to actually navigate yourself into a positive timeline. This is real next level stuff. And this is just the first part. Then he goes into other types of energy dynamics, which I've never really thought of. Things like projected importance, excess potential, balanced forces, and all these other things which have always been subtly at play throughout your life if you look at it, taking you for a ride and moving you into different timelines. So I highly recommend you get this book and study this material if you're interested in timeline navigation and actually helping humanity and helping yourself move into a positive timeline. You know, ultimately, what do we want? We want global awakening. We want the golden timeline. We want disclosure, and we want, you know, the ultimate thing for humanity to come together. But you've got to realize that there's more at play here right now than just information. This is what I've realized after reading this book. Team Dark, the dark side, the whatever you want to call them, the deep state at the highest level, I believe they're very, very aware of these dynamics. And if you've done your research and study, then you know that you know, this whole thing has been going on for much, much, much longer than just the past few years. This is a span for centuries as humanity has been socially engineered, as we have been manipulated through so many different avenues. But this is not just through information. This is also through energy dynamics and conditioning humanity to respond energetically to certain stimulus and to be unaware of certain things. They are manipulating us on so many different levels, not just information, but also shamanically, as I'm starting to realize, through the process of actually manipulating consciousness and the energy dynamics that we are able to adhere to, connect with, respond to, the vortexes at play, so that we can be more easily led to the timeline that they want. So if you want to create your own timeline and a better timeline for humanity, wake up to these concepts and start to play with them in your own life and start to see what's really going on. That's what I'm starting to realize, is that there's so much more at play than just information, which is why I've kind of backed away from just looking at the information, because it's not the information that's important. It's actually the emotional charge around it that is way, 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 way more important than just looking at like what's going on. It's the emotional charge and what you do with it, and how aware of you are of that or not, and how it interconnects with many other aspects of your life. So the book is called Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zeland. I highly recommend you get it and check it out. Let me know if you've enjoyed this video. If you want to hear more about Reality Transurfing, just post your comments down below. If you're watching this on my blog and you haven't seen any of this from me for any time before, just subscribe up above, put your email in, and I'll make sure to get you a lot more of my awesome stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.